Lowcountry Land Trust's mission is simple: to protect the water and land along the South Carolina coast region forever. Today, I talk one-on-one with Ashley Demosthenes, the Executive Director of the Lowcountry Land Trust, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Ashley Demosthenes, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome. I know that you obviously are the Executive Director of the Lowcountry Land Trust, which is a 501c3 nonprofit and the largest local land trust in South Carolina. I know that you all work within all 17 counties of South Carolina's coastal plain, and your mission is to protect land and water forever, nurture relationships between people and places, and connect conservation to community. Let me ask you this. What's new, what's now with the Lowcountry Land Trust?
Okay, great question. So, Quintin, we are in the midst of a very busy time at Lowcountry Land Trust. In fact, I was just at one of our committee meetings yesterday, and we are poised to protect an additional close to 9,000 acres between now and the end of this calendar year, which is a significant number for us. Those acres represent properties all up and down our coastal focus areas, mostly on private land, many of which you can see from waterways and from roadways. That's part of what we do is, although we work on private lands, that represents major public benefit as you're traversing these roadways and waterways throughout South Carolina. What you're seeing is protected land, more so than you might think. So we have that going on. We have a way to connect people to land. You mentioned that was part of our mission. We are working in concert with the city of Charleston on the land adjacent to the angel oak tree in the park that the city owns. So that is a magnificent piece of property that was protected back in 2013, our property that we own, the 35 acres. That was funded. We purchased that land with funding from the South Carolina Conservation Bank and from the Charleston County Greenbelt Program. So a lot of investment and community investment has been put into the protection of that property. And now it's time for us to do our master planning effort and then open it up to the public. So we are working very closely with the city of Charleston on that plan. We've hired our landscape architect, and we've been doing a ton of community engagement to find out exactly what is needed, what is desired for that broader, bigger park experience. And so the Charleston City paper just wrote a really nice piece about it. It was on the cover, and we're really, really excited about the unveiling of those plans, which will happen later this fall.
Yes, and I love the city paper. You know, they put me back on the cover in 2016 myself.
Yes, that's right.
So much fun.
And go ahead.
Oh, no, you go for it.
I was going to say, and one other way we're connecting people to land is through our events. We have a series of events throughout the year. The next one that's coming up is on October 22nd and 23rd. And this one is for the sporting type. If you like to shoot clays, sporting clays, that's always really fun. And that's an event that will occur on a protected piece of property up in Dorchester County known as Brosnan Forest. And I'm shamelessly plugging this event because tickets are now on sale. You can go to our website and buy tickets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope to get you back on to talk about that in the fall. So what other private lands are you protecting right now?
So these could be private properties down in, let's say, we're working on something in Jasper County. We're working on properties in Charleston County along the Ashley River. We have projects going on in partnership with the town of McClellanville.
Yes.
We have projects on Johns Island. There's one that's particularly significant along Highway 17. It's a highly visible property known as the Sea Island Small Farmers Co-op. And that is right on the Wallace River in Charleston County off of Highway 17. And that is a cooperative project with the Charleston County Greenbelt Program, the South Carolina Conservation Bank, and a nonprofit known as Lacuna Corporation. Lacuna bought the property because it was highly threatened with development, incompatible development, and we are partnering with Lacuna for the permanent protection of that land. And the hope is that it goes to the Charleston County Parks and Recreation Commission. And that site is known in part for its use formally as exactly as its name, the Sea Island Small Farmers Co-op, and it was also one of the sites of the Stono Rebellion. So it has quite a bit of significance historically, and we're excited about permanently protecting that property, which is highly visible from Highway 17 and will be available to the public in the near future.
And actually, might be a silly, obvious question, but what other private properties in your purview, obviously, that are actually being threatened right now by development?
Oh, goodness. I think anywhere that you go within the Tri-County region is threatened with development. And not all development's bad, okay? I want to be very clear about that. We are not anti-development. We are in favor of development, that is within, growth patterns and in places where it's not adversely impacting natural resource values. We need to protect, swamps and bottomland hardwood forests along our rivers. We need to protect our waterways for water quality purposes. We need to protect natural resources and what I call natural infrastructure to absorb stormwater, to do all the things that we benefit from every day. So, like I said, we're not anti-development. We are about smart development and placing development, in places that do not adversely impact those natural resource values. Now, and I know that was a very general answer, but literally anywhere you go within the Tri-County region, especially up the I-26 corridor, there's a lot of development that should go in the I-26 corridor, but then there's places that need to be set aside forever for conservation. Now,
What are those growth patterns that you and your team are looking at right now?
So up and down Highway 17, certainly in Charleston County. So North Highway 17, South Highway 17. So east of Charleston and west of Charleston. There's a lot of growth happening west of Charleston, not far from, where you cross the Stono River onto Johns Island. That is a hot spot for growth. And then, of course, areas around Dorchester County, Somerville, heading up the I-26 corridor. There's growth happening in the East Branch of the Cooper River area around Clements Ferry Road. There's a lot happening in that. And, there's communities in those areas that are settlement communities that are being completely surrounded and enveloped by large-scale development. And we have concerns about that and how it impacts those settlement communities, but ultimately also our natural resources. With things like sea level rise and, climate change, and those types of impacts on our landscapes, it's really important that we develop smartly and consider those factors in future development. So, but yes, along our major roadways and in these communities, we're seeing the impacts of growth, both positive and negative. And what we are trying to do is just achieve a balance and really kind of provide a space for discussion about what that balance looks like and how we can achieve it together. So I think that's the key.
Let me just ask you the obvious. What is that balance?
Well, it's difficult to achieve. I mean, I'm not going to hide behind that. I think that we've done a great job of working with our conservation partners over the years in protecting landscapes and protecting large properties. But it's not enough. And so one thing that we are doing is working very closely with the economic development community to have an open dialogue about what are the most important places to set aside for conservation. And our partners and the Land Trust are looking at growth plans for the different counties and, trying to understand where the counties want to take their growth and then, we're there to advise on, okay, well, have you considered this? So I think providing realistic alternatives and making sure that the comprehensive plans for each of these counties have our input into them, to make sure that that balance is at least somewhat achieved. It's hard, Quintin. I'm not going to we're not Pollyanna over here. We understand that it's difficult, and with the explosion of growth in the region, like I said, it presents both opportunities and challenges. And I think as long as we are maintaining that open dialogue and being very, very conscious of what the unintended consequences are of unfettered development, then we should be able, I think, to achieve some semblance of balance. But it's tough. This is not an easy climate to work in.
Where exactly is the unfettered growth here in the region?
So I'm just thinking about large scale developments that are occurring and permitted developments I'll give you a great example. Johns Island. Johns Island is absolutely exploding with growth, and that is I consider Johns Island to be one of the most special sea islands on the East Coast. And as a child growing up on James Island, and going to camp out at Camp St. Christopher, I remember, going down Maybank Highway and Bohicket Road before Betsy Carrison was established as a 4-lane kind of boulevard. And, I have sentimental feelings about Johns Island, but I think that that is a great example of where growth has exploded, and it has had unintended consequences. Development of neighborhoods where there are wetlands, and increased flooding, and of course the traffic. So that's a growing pain that we're experiencing all over the region. But I think Johns Island is one of those places that has incredible ecological, cultural, and historical significance that we must work hard to try to protect into the future. And so that's what we're doing. We have partners. We're working with the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. We are working with the Open Space Institute. We're working with the Coastal Conservation League. We'll work with anybody, quite frankly, who is interested in protecting the rural integrity of Johns Island. And we're hoping, frankly, Quintin, that the angel oak serves as a beacon and as a symbol of the protection of Johns Island, and not just protection of the angel oak site itself, but what it means for us to work with the community to conserve the integrity of Johns Island. Wadmalaw Island is right next door, and Wadmalaw is very special for the same reasons that Johns Island is, but we're seeing growth occurring out there as well. Perhaps not as, it's not of the same character as the growth pressures on Johns Island, but it's still there, and we need to continue to work with landowners out on Wadmalaw Island to protect those just irreplaceable resources and culture.
I guess, I've been doing interviews now for a decade, but for the past 3 years since COVID has happened, I've actually interviewed every, elected official or leader about their comprehensive plan, and some people feel like they don't get any answers from those particular interviews. Have you all been able to get any input or been able to put your input into these comprehensive plans?
We, our staff is keenly aware of what's going on with each of these, comprehensive plans, whether it be Charleston County, Dorchester County, Berkeley County, and I've considered that really the Tri-County region. And so we attend the meetings, we go to planning and zoning, along with our partners over at the Coastal Conservation League. They do the same. And so we try to stay as aware and informed as possible, and then definitely making, providing input just as the public does. So, we're part of the community and the public just like everybody else and individuals. So we endeavor to, make sure that our input is considered.
Now, how are you elevating land conservation statewide?
Okay, that's a great question. So we are one of about 25 land trusts across the state of South Carolina. And I serve on the board of the South Carolina Land Trust Network. And that is our statewide association of land trusts. We have one staff member. She is our part-time executive director. And her job is to make sure that the land trusts across the state of South Carolina are in touch with one another, that we are providing support for each of those land trusts in terms of resources and education, to stay on top of what's trending, what's new, what's the tax laws, how are we drafting our conservation easements, from the high level to the technical. And so we are one of those partners involved in the South Carolina Land Trust Network. And we serve, I think, as an advisor to many land trusts that aren't haven't been around as long as we have. And we have a very, very strong, positive working relationship with each of our land trusts in the state of South Carolina. It is not as competitive as you might suspect it would be or think it would be. It's much more of a partnership. So I think that is how we impact conservation at the statewide level. In addition, we are quite involved in other statewide initiatives that promote conservation. Right now, the governor is extraordinarily supportive of conservation in South Carolina and bolstering the efforts of the South Carolina Conservation Bank, which is our only statewide funding source for land conservation for both private and public land. So I think that that's another way that we are involved. We are a very active applicant to the Conservation Bank, and they have made significant investments all over the state of South Carolina on critical properties, including farms, forests, cultural sites, and the like.
And my sincere apology, the janitorial guy is coming due with the lawnmower. He's cutting the grass, so you may have I may have to repeat the questions a couple of times.
Okay.
But let me ask you this: how do you raise the profile of the Lowcountry Land Trust such that they are perceived as such an essential community institution?
We are raising our sites quite a bit by increasing the amount of communication that we put out there. So we've made some strategic hires this year to enable us to be more visible with the public. And I think one of the things that we do very well is community engagement through our partnerships with the business community, but then also promoting connection to land through some other initiatives that we have formed over the years. One is called Soul of the Lowcountry. Another one is called Flourish. We have convened conversations around that balance of growth and conservation in the region. But increasing our communications, increasing our visibility through social media, through earned media, through inviting people to participate in our events. We want to be more and more of a welcoming organization that people can plug into. We are working on developing a volunteer program where people can get out and volunteer on maybe a marsh cleanup. We've had several cleanups at the Angel Oak property. Believe it or not, there's a lot of roadside trash and things like that. And we've had MUSC come out there and volunteer with their employees. We've had Boeing employees come out there. We've partnered with Keep South Carolina Beautiful. And that's another good point, Quintin, that I shouldn't spare comment on. We are really big on partnerships. So working with other organizations who are also very deeply invested in the community. It's a group effort. It's a team effort to make South Carolina the best it can be. And so I think through partnerships, we are elevating the visibility of the organization and working collaboratively with others.
And Ashley, in what way do you obviously mobilize significant new public and philanthropic and corporate funding for the land conservation across the state? Pardon me for the delay there with the answer. I mean, the question that is.
That's okay. Can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I understand it.
Yes, ma'am. In what way do you mobilize significant new public and corporate funding for land conservation across the state of South Carolina?
There's no better way to do that than to get people out on the land. I think that's when somebody, whether they're elected officials or corporate partners, newcomers to the region, when we take them out to a protected property, such as the one where our sporting clay shoot is going to be, it almost speaks for itself. You experience what it's like to be in a beautiful setting, a forest, or out on the water, surrounded by the salt marsh. Those kinds of things. So, by taking people out into the Ace Basin, by taking them out, out into Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge, taking them out onto the Angel Oak. Most of our events are hosted on private protected properties that otherwise would not be accessible. So that is a wonderful way to show people what the importance of conservation is. But I'll give you an example of something we did a couple of weeks ago. As part of a statewide initiative known as SC7, we went and took a group of people out into Bulls Bay, the estuary. And Coastal Expeditions was our partner for that day. MUSC was the sponsoring partner for that endeavor. But we went out with Tom Mulliken and his SC7 crew and went out into the estuary, and it was a bird watching tour. And again, I think we invited people that we knew would enjoy it, but we also invited people that we thought wouldn't have the opportunity otherwise to do something like that. So we're very thoughtful about how we engage folks that are new to the Charleston area, and that is something we are working very hard to do because people move here, I think, because of the quality of life, right? They've heard about Charleston. It keeps getting ranked as the #1 place in the world to live, which is, a wonderful thing. It's also, however, part of the growing pains that we're experiencing. But if we can connect people as soon as possible, and I say that obviously in very general terms, we can't connect with every single person moving to the Charleston region, but we do our best to make ourselves, an advisor and a resource for people when they land here.
And from 2020 to right now, what has been the increased rate of land conservation, not only in rural and suburban areas, but also in those urban communities that have not been traditionally a focus of the land trust community?
Mm-hmm. In the urban areas?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So since 2020, you said?
Yes, ma'am.
COVID, I think, has taught us that the more open space we have access to, the better for our physical and mental health. Having places to walk and to get outside is really important. One of the things that we did during that period of time was we merged with another land trust who has accomplished more in the area of urban conservation than Lowcountry Land Trust had in its 35 years. So we merged with the East Cooper Land Trust, who has partnered with the town of Mount Pleasant and other municipalities and other settlement communities within the Mount Pleasant area and the East Cooper region. So for us anyway, that was one way that we've, I think, enhanced our portfolio of projects to include publicly accessible sites within the East Cooper region. So yes, urban areas that have now access to smaller protected sites within the East Cooper area. And beyond that, we are, seeing other urban areas, including parks and open space. Right now, the Dorchester County and Berkeley County are considering ballot measures for parks and recreation and open space, which is really important. So, we'll begin to see funding, hopefully, if those two ballot measures pass, which I hope that they will. There'll be additional funding to protect lands in both urban and rural spaces. And same in Charleston County. Charleston County is a leader in this area with the Greenbelt program, funding projects in both the urban and the rural areas of Charleston County. And there's pots of funding for both urban and rural.
And speaking of which, in turbulent political times and with many obviously competing priorities, how do you maintain the current rate of land conservation without it being a challenge?
Without it being a challenge?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I don't know if we can. I mean, it is a challenge. There's challenges no matter what, I think. So the rate of conservation is entirely based upon funding availability, which thankfully, if Berkeley and Dorchester pass their ballot measures, that will be wonderful. If the state, and I think the state has already raised its commitment to supporting land conservation at the statewide level, and with the governor's initiative to protect 30% of the state. That too will bring additional funding from the state level. There's a great deal of federal funding coming down from Washington to support protection of communities and supporting resilience of communities in the face of climate change. So all of that helps a great deal when we have access to capital to be able to move quickly and be nimble and protect both public properties or properties that will go into the public realm, sure, such as with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources or the Forest Service, and then also to protect more and more conservation easements that protect public benefits such as wildlife habitat and water quality. So I think it's what we are doing at Lowcountry Land Trust and in our strategic plan is to accelerate the pace of conservation. And, obviously funding is a major component of that, but increasing our capacity to get out into these rural landscapes and protect land that we know where growth is headed.
Now, how many more easements are you trying to acquire right now?
Well, let's see. We have about over 10 projects that we're working on at the moment. But I'll be honest with you, we have about 350 at the moment across all of the 17 counties. We've been around for 36 years, so we've been doing this a while. And then if you consider sometimes properties have the ability to, from one they become one into 2 or 3 properties if we allow very, very limited division of the property. We have 500 landowners with whom we're working. So there's never, you can't have too many. I guess that's my answer to the question. You ask how many we're working on now, how many we want to work on. We want to protect as much as we possibly can with willing landowners. This is voluntary, by the way. We're not out there, pounding on doors. This is something that, while we are proactive in our approach to working with landowners, it's a voluntary act by landowners. And so we're seeing more and more support for it. We will work with anybody who would like to work with us, generally speaking, provided their land, meets the criteria for conservation. And I think our partners feel the same way. The more we can protect and the faster we can do it, the better.
Now, okay. Well, as far as accessing capital, that is, Ashley, let me ask you this. Besides, obviously, the Conservation Bank and the Charleston County Greenbelt Program, what other funding are you trying to acquire right now?
There are other sources of funds that are available, including there's one at the federal level known as the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, otherwise known as NAWCA. And that program is designed to protect properties specifically that have key wetland habitat for bird species and biodiverse for bird habitat. So that is one funding source that we have used and our partners have used, and there's been a great deal of investment through the NAWCA program to protect properties up and down the coastal plain. So that's a very important one. The Farm Bill is another federal program that is designed to protect farmland. And so it's been utilized here. That is a program administered through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and it gets reauthorized every so often. And sometimes it gets expanded to include different types of lands. But within the Farm Bill, they have many, many different programs that can apply to farmland and other rural resources. There are properties that we've protected up and down the Savannah River, utilizing a funding source known as the Savannah River Clean Water Fund. And that is essentially a natural capital fund that was designed years ago to protect properties critical to potable water and drinking water along the Savannah River. And other creative funding sources like that have been created across the country, but in South Carolina, the Savannah River Clean Water Fund is one of those that's specific to that particular basin, the Savannah River Basin. Let's see. There are Beaufort County has its own county funding program. It was the first actually to design a bond referendum in South Carolina. So Beaufort went first. They have been very successful in protecting large and small tracts within Beaufort County, and they are also considering a renewal of that program. So you'll be hearing more about that probably in the news coming up soon. Greenville County maybe has one. I understand that Oconee may have one. So that is a growing trend across the country, is seeing these county funding programs be established or at least supported by communities in November. So every year we see the main organization that we work with that helps partner with communities to establish these is known as the Trust for Public Land. They're very, very good at establishing and working with communities on these ballot measures. And every year, when there's an election, we see an uptick in those because they're helpful to leverage funding at the state and the federal level. And communities taking ownership, quite frankly, of what they need for conservation in their areas.
And have you actually decided to expand funding for land conservation and stewardship through state and local, those particular measures that you just mentioned?
I'm just trying to make sure I understand your question.
Well, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
The lawnmower guy is still going at it. I am so sorry about this.
No, that's okay.
Let me ask you this. How will you defend federal and state tax incentives for private land conservation and ensure they remain accessible and workable for the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, okay. So the tax incentives that are available for conservation are, that was a permanent reauthorization by Congress several years ago. And they're quite generous. And when they reauthorized the tax incentives years ago, it was with an enhancement. So landowners can take a federal income tax deduction for doing a conservation easement, of course, which represents a charitable contribution. There's also in South Carolina a state tax credit. So we have a double benefit. Not every state in the country does, but we do. Virginia does, Colorado does. That does help to accelerate the pace of conservation. And in South Carolina, that legislation was written by Senator Chip Campson, who has been one of the greatest champions for conservation in the State House, among many others. But Senator Campson certainly has played a huge role in creating the Conservation Bank, for example, and the state tax credit. What is happening, Quintin, at the national level is a bill that's helping, we hope, to tamp down on conservation easement abuse and tax abuse. So there's a piece of legislation known as the Charitable Conservation Easement Integrity Act, and that is to prevent inflated appraisal values that really don't have really any grounding in reality, and trying to prevent conservation easement, using that as a tool for purely financial gain and not really protecting that much land. So there's a tool out there called Syndicated Easements, and we are not in favor of syndicated easements. The Land Trust Alliance, which is the national organization and association for land trusts, they write the standards and practices for easements and land trusts across the country. They have been really the main organization that is trying to work with our elected officials in Washington to remove or at least try to minimize the syndicated easement movement, which it doesn't help anybody except for a few people who would just like to, monetize conservation easements and not in a healthy way. So that is something that we are, not in favor of. Syndicated easements. We're not in favor of that, and we are trying to work with our elected officials to support this piece of legislation that will surgically remove essentially the ability for syndicators to keep doing what they're doing and undermining the larger conservation movement.
And have you all seen any evidence of easement abuse here in the Tri-County region?
There's been some. I think that most of the syndications that I've seen are up in the Horry County region and also up in the upstate. So not to say that it doesn't happen in the Tri-County region, but I've not seen too many examples of it here. It has occurred down in the Jasper County region and much more so in the state of Georgia. There's been a lot of activity there with this type of transaction, and but I've, like I said, I don't see it that much in the Charleston, Berkeley, Dorchester area. The hot spots so far in South Carolina have been in the upstate, Horry County, and then closer to the Georgia border.
And let me ask you this too: what is your strategy to defend the land trust community from threats that endanger specific conserve lands, obviously, and the viability of the entire community?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is our obligation as a land trust to defend all of our conservation easements. That's our job. And, when somebody agrees to a perpetual agreement, conservation easements are forever. And so we have a stewardship and legal defense fund that enables us to protect the conservation rights that we hold across all, the 350 easements that we hold. And it's our job to make sure that whatever has been set aside for conservation remains that way. So, and our partners have the same access or the same. That is a requirement. If you're gonna form a land trust and you're gonna be in the land trust business, you must have funds specifically set aside to defend those easements. And there is a program that the Land Trust Alliance established years and years ago that many land trusts subscribe to, known as terra firma. So essentially, it's like insurance. It's legal defense insurance. So there's that, and we try to work with communities to ensure that those, especially if there's something that was established through a municipality or urban growth boundaries, for example, those I think are important tools that are established through comp plans, and we and our partners try to ensure that those are honored as well. And sometimes they get, a little bit muddled through annexations or movement of that line. And we would like to see the urban growth boundary stay hardened and where it is and not move, because then that, undermines the efforts also of our counties and municipalities. If an urban growth boundary is established, it needs to just stay where it is and not move.
And I want to get you back on, hopefully in December, because Zoom has only given me less than a minute. But I want to talk to you more about the urban growth boundaries and some other things in the comp plans as well. But Ashley Demosthenes of the Lowcountry Land Trust, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups, and thank you for dealing with me with all of these issues around.
No, not at all. It's a pleasure. I've enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope I gave you enough information.
Well, you did. Thank you greatly.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.